Neurons, also called nerve cells, are the basic units of communication in the nervous system. Similar to a telephone network or the internet, they receive and deliver messages all over our brains and nervous system. All of the brain's activities, including sensory information processing, moving, thinking, feeling, and remembering, involve communication between these nerve cells. We'll explore the electrochemical processes underlying communication between neurons. But first, let's look at what's happening inside individual neurons when they are at rest and at work. Neurons are surrounded by three-dimensional, dynamic, semi-permeable membranes composed of two layers of fats called lipids. Semi-permeable means that the membrane allows some particles to move in or out of the neuron, but other particles are not allowed to pass through. This semi-permeable membrane separates the intracellular environment, which is the inside of the neuron, from the extracellular environment, or the outside of the neuron. Charged particles, called ions, can move in and out at specific times by passing through channels or openings in the semi-permeable membrane. When the neuron is at rest, that is, when it is not sending or receiving information, there is a difference in charge between the inside and the outside of the neuron. This difference in charge, which is about minus 70 millivolts, is known as the resting membrane potential. In other words, at rest, the nerve cell is negative on the inside relative to the outside. A neuron at rest is similar to your cell phone at rest. It's on and ready, and it requires energy to stay ready, but no one is calling or texting you, and you are not calling or texting anyone. If conditions change, however, and you text someone or a call comes in, your ringtone begins to sound, the phone may vibrate, and the phone springs into action. A neuron springs into action in a very similar way when a message comes through. Three factors help to keep a neuron at rest: diffusion, electrostatic pressure, and the sodium-potassium pump. The force of diffusion moves ions down their concentration gradients from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. It's similar to when you put a teaspoon of sugar into a glass of iced tea. The sugar initially is concentrated at the bottom of the glass. The sugar slowly moves down its concentration gradient, or diffuses throughout the glass of iced tea, until it is evenly dispersed and every sip of tea tastes sweet. Electrostatic pressure pushes ions of opposite charges together, and ions with the same charges apart. The sodium-potassium pump exchanges sodium for potassium ions across the cell membrane. The pump requires energy to maintain the resting potential, much like your cell phone requires battery power, even when it is not actively sending or receiving messages. On each side of the neuron cell membrane are ions, or charged particles, of sodium, Na+, potassium, K+, and chloride, Cl-. As you can probably guess, sodium and potassium are positively charged ions, or cations, and chloride is a negatively charged ion, or anion. There are also large organic anions, A-, which are negatively charged, located inside the neuron. The forces of diffusion and electrostatic pressure act on these ions. The large organic ions want to move down their concentration gradient out of the cell, because there are more organic anions inside the neuron than outside, much like there is more sugar concentrated at the bottom of your glass of iced tea. Electrostatic pressure wants to also move the organic ions out of the neuron because they are negatively charged particles and therefore are repelled by the negative charge inside the neuron. However, the cell membrane is impermeable to these large organic ions, so they are stuck inside the neuron. As a result of their inability to cross the cell membrane, the large organic ions help maintain the negative internal charge of the neuron at rest. When the neuron is at rest, there is more potassium, K+, inside of the cell than outside. The diffusion force pushes potassium down its concentration gradient, through the membrane and out of the neuron, but electrostatic pressure pushes the positively charged potassium in, because it is attracted to the negative internal environment. Therefore, the potassium level stays balanced, which helps to keep the neuron at rest. There is also more chloride, Cl-, outside of the cell than inside at rest. Diffusion pushes chloride down its concentration gradient, across the membrane, and into the cell, but electrostatic pressure pushes chloride out because it has a negative charge and is therefore repelled by the negative charge inside the resting neuron. At rest, there is more sodium, Na+, outside of the cell than inside. Sodium has a positive charge, so it is naturally attracted to the negative charge inside the cell. Therefore, both diffusion and electrostatic pressure want to push sodium into the cell. Note that unlike potassium and chloride, both electrostatic pressure and diffusion push sodium in the same direction, into the cell. As it moves down its concentration gradient and is attracted to the negative charge inside the neuron, sodium brings its positive charge with it, eventually making the neuron positive on the inside and active, not at rest. So to maintain the resting potential, sodium must be pumped out of the cell. This is where the sodium-potassium pump comes in. The sodium-potassium pump actively exchanges sodium for potassium to keep the ions balanced and to maintain the resting potential. The sodium-potassium pump requires energy to pump out sodium, just like your cell phone requires energy or battery power to quietly wait for messages to be sent or received.